Well, during my marriage, my wife was the only one who knew that I had a reading problem. She didn't know how severe it was because I was always able to make money and pay the bills. And for 2 years, she went to college, and I was the only one working. But I worked two jobs, and I was always managed to, have a house and a decent car and all this. So no one really knew that I couldn't read or write.
How about your kids?
No, my kids never knew. Even the time when I read my kids' stories, like it was stories that I rehearsed and practiced, and while reading, they wouldn't look at the book, and I'd place a couple of words in to get through the story.
I do all the shopping. I take my husband to the doctor. I drive.
How'd you pass the driver's test?
I memorized the questions, and that's how I got my driver's license.
Huh, you had a test and you memorized them? Or?
Mm-hmm. The written test?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I memorized the question.
My goodness, how long did that take?
Oh, I got 100%. The only thing I got 100% on. The only thing I got 100% on.
I didn't know how to read those signs, what they got, bus schedules. I didn't know how to read them correctly. And I had to go up to the clerk and ask me what time my bus leaving, all this.
Did you tell him you couldn't read and ask him to help?
No, no, I just say, will you please help me, tell me when is my bus schedule, and I would ask the bus driver too.
When did you ever tell anyone you couldn't read?
Matter of fact, I haven't told nobody I couldn't read.
I worked for a moving company, a private moving company in Los Gatos when I was going to school for drafting. And the guy who owned the company, he was retired, and we just mainly moved pianos. So he turned the truck and the garage and everything over to me. And I would hire the people and do the jobs for him. And I would only hire college students, right? And they would fill out the forms, and I would supervise the job. And I knew a lot more about moving pianos and stuff than they did. And no one never discovered, and I was a cheese man, I mean, I got the money and everything. And I ran the whole operation for about a year and a half for him. Mm. And, and that's when I found, like, hey, I'm a lot smarter than these guys. All they go to Santa Clara University, but basically, mother wit. I have a lot more mother wit than they do.
So what I would do would make a mark on the can. That way I put the mark beside the letter, what it was. So when I had to fill out the invoice or order something, all I had to do was look to see the can that wasn't there and order it. And the minute they changed the menus, because I had to make the tartar sauce and I had to make all these sauces, and so I had to find other ways because I couldn't read to do it. And then some days, when I had to work a double shift or a cook called in sick or something, the first person they would ask was me. And I wouldn't say no because I didn't want to lose my job.
What kind of jobs did you get?
I did cooking. I worked in restaurants, mostly.
And how did you, I guess a waiter would write out a ticket and put it in a little
Well,
thing.
no, I'd have to remember, in a couple places I worked, they'd call in the orders, and I'd have to remember all these different orders in my head. So that's very different. It's very nerve-wracking. And so this is very hard when you run into these different situations. But you start coding with stuff like this. But as you get older, you can't. I mean, it gets to you. You feel like you're going to crack up after a while. You can't tell them you can't read because you'll be out of a job, and then you have to go and fill out another application. And this way you can't. At the time I couldn't. So it's very hard. And somebody that can read and they try to push something on them, they can say, well, forget it, I'm not going to do it.
It made me sad because I would pick up a book and read it and don't know the meaning of it or no understanding of it. And I didn't do nothing about it since I put it down. I just left it alone until now, until I just sit there in the rut in the corner. and just pot away or go back to bed and listen to a radio.
Well, I was born in South Carolina, and my grandfather was a sharecropper. So consequently, we went to school like 4 months a year. And so I developed, I guess at that early age, not learning the reading techniques, and schools were very substandard. Then I moved to New York, I guess, when I was about 12 or 13. And by this time, I had a real problem because my language, Southern language drill was really terrible.
A lot of times I knew the answers in that, but I wouldn't say them because I didn't want to be embarrassed.
What do you mean?
Well, as a child, I mean, they say, well, he can't learn this well, and so I just would freeze. I wouldn't say anything. 50 years ago, they put you in back if you didn't go along with the others because she had 49 children, so it was very hard for the teacher. And so I can't blame the teacher either, and I can't blame my mother because she had no help from my father. So this is where I failed.
I didn't have too much schooling in me. It was mostly because my mother came up here in '58, and we was one place, one house to another. So to me, it was like one school to another. Like I would stay in one school a month or 3, and then Will might turn around and go to another school.
Well, my mind would go blank when I would try to read
Why do you
for
think?
her. I would shake. I would always shake. And another thing too is even down to spelling. Instead of her trying to help me or help the other ones, which she would help the other ones better than she would with me.
Mm.
I don't know. She just had it in for me.
Mm. What was her name?
Sister Oliver. I'll never forget it. Never.
When I had to get away from my father because he tried to teach me how to read and used to beat me a lot, and I had to get away from him, but I had to know how to get back because I had no place else to live. So I had to figure out a way to get home and to get back. And if I left home and didn't want him to know where I was, I couldn't ask nobody how to get here, could get there, because he'd have found me then. So you just memorize the signs, or how many poles before you got to that sign, or if you turn left or turn right, something like that.
In the New York school system, we had like 30, 35, 40 kids in the classroom. And if you were, quiet and didn't say anything, the teacher would, was glad that she had someone that was quiet. So you would just, pass by as being a good student, and you didn't make any trouble. So you would just pass.
My mother says, good, you don't have to go there no more. You go to another school because she's very mean and you're not learning nothing there. Which, like I say, my mother talked Italian and we answered back in English, always. And so then I went to a public school.
And so I decided one day that I was going to go underground just to see what it was like. Well, if I went halfway, started going underground, BART started going underground, and I couldn't hear what the man was saying over the loudspeaker. So the first thing I did, I got off. I've never been so terrified in my life to be lost, because I used to in Wisconsin, I could count light poles or either memorize different restaurants because I knew where I was and stuff like that. But underground, you can't do that because you can't see anything. And I realized that I couldn't do any more tricks or pull any more stunts to prove that they showed. So the cover-up I couldn't read because I was lost and I had to do something to get back. And I have a discount pass that I can buy a BART ticket for $1.25 worth $12. And it took me the whole $12 to get back to San Francisco.
My husband kept on me. After I worked 24 years in the sewing shop, it closed up. I'll be off 2 years, October the 16th. So then he said, well, now you're not going to work anymore. He says, I think it's time for you to go to school.
It would seem to me that to start back reading and when you're an adult, it would take a lot of courage. Do you think it took courage?
Yeah, it took a lot of courage, but in your heart, I always said, I always want to learn how to read. Before I die, I want to learn how to read.
She thought he would benefit from individual tutoring, so I said, all right, I would take him, and I took him into one of their little rooms there and felt him out, told him to read so that I could see what his level of reading was, and I sort of interviewed him and to find out what his background was and also what he was really interested in, so I could apply my teaching to what he really was into.
Was he nervous?
No, he wasn't nervous. He's a big grown man, 6-footer, so I don't think I made him nervous.
Did he make you nervous?
No, I don't get too nervous with people.
When I first met them, it was exciting, and I said, well, I was saying to myself, they coming out, they leaving their work job or getting off their break or taking their breaks, off and coming down to the school and teaching us something, out of the school materials or their own materials. I think that's beautiful.
In the classroom, certain things are set up for you to do, methods, visuals, and what have you. But that personal interaction between the student, that's something that is really not taught in the school. It's something that you have to learn, and adapting with people and knowing how much to give, when to back off, how much to encourage, that type of thing. And you learn this by sort of like process of elimination, trial and error.
Once you pass third, you don't learn anymore. That's what I always was taught. And I thought that once I got here, I couldn't learn, or it wouldn't. If it didn't make no sense then, why would it make any sense now?
Does it?
It makes a lot of sense now because Vicky, one of my teachers, I asked her one day, how come when you move one letter from a word, the whole meaning changes? And she just looked at me and she said, well, your name's Pat, and you put another letter there, the whole meaning changes. It's not your name anymore, is it? And I looked at her and I said, yeah, you're all right. And I think if I'd had more people approach it like that, I'd have been a lot better off.
I think the most frustrating things happened during the first 2 or 3 meetings with a particular student, and you think you're making progress, and the student understands what you're looking for, and you understand the student. The student sits through the lesson and says, yes, I understand, and you come back to the next session a few days later, and the student looks at you totally blank.
Well, they realize too, if they're a good tutor, that if they show you something, they're going to have to show you maybe 15 times again before you start catching on, or even more to some people. Because just because they show you something, it doesn't mean that you're going to remember it and know it. It doesn't come that easy. It takes a great deal of time, and it takes a great deal of time on their efforts.
It took my daughter 2 weeks to teach me how to read the 23rd Psalm, and it took my father to try to teach me the Lord's Prayer in 18 years, and it didn't work. So to me, it depended on the person that was doing the teaching.
Even today, with Ann and Eleanor, I work together, and Ann brought a little story that she had written in class, and she asked Ann, can you read this? And Ann said, and Eleanor said, well, yeah, I'll read it. And she read the first sentence, and then the second sentence, and both of them were like, so joyous, and we read that, and it was just, you could just see it on their faces, all the delight it gave them to be able to read this simple story.
I want to learn how to read, and because I have a sick husband, and sooner or later I'm going to have to do all of this here, like write out checks, which now I can write out a check. I learned it in the last few months.
How much longer do you think you'll keep studying?
Well, until I can function as a normal person, so I don't have to scheme or think of ways of how to do things what's coming. Because my goal is to, at least by the first of the year, the middle of the year, be able to fill out an application. I can just about get it down. It's just a few things I have to get done.
What you really find out is how uneducated you really are when you start opening books. You really don't know this until you open a book, because you can't picture it, because you brush your mind away so much from this one thing. You want it, but you're afraid of it. And it's like a disease. You're afraid of this certain thing, and you're afraid to tackle it.
Having my own company now, Rich Productions, I do want to grow and want to get bigger, and I do want to get into a higher income bracket as well, and be comfortable and not have to always fear that I'm going to be discovered here or discovered there, or I'm not going to be able to succeed.
When
I
you
don't
say
want
discovered, what do you mean?
being discovered as a person who cannot read.
At that time, I didn't know how to read a good book, but now I got the swing of it. So it's good. And words that I stumbled up on, it's hard for me to pronounce it and spell too. So I leave it on the side and put it on a piece of paper for my tutor.
You say read a good book. What
Okay, a good novel, like, for instance, I read one good novel about slavery. Okay.
What was it called? Do you remember?
Freedom. The Other Side of Freedom.